I am April Morrow with Sovereign Women Speak, and I am here to interview Scott Fleming, who is a correctional officer, a former correctional officer for WCCW. And we have Liz here joining us as well. So, Scott, why don't you go ahead and let us know, when did you start working for WCCW, and how many years later was it when they started to allow men inside the facility with women?
Well, I started at that particular institution in October of 2018, and I believe there may have already been one um, male to female transgender that had been incarcerated there prior to my arrival. And but they really started moving them in right around, it seems to be right around the time that COVID hit. It seems so, towards the end of 2019, maybe middle 2019.
Hmm. So when that happened, was there some type of training, or how did you start? How did you know how to? It's a big job change there, as far as your responsibilities inside the prison go. Did you have any type of training?
No, no. As a matter of fact, there's still a lot of training. As far as I know, when I was leaving, they were still working on implementing a procedures for pat searches and for strip searches. Um, uh, I guess right around seems like mid last year, the summer 2021, they were coming up with procedures as far as a training for us um, on how we should handle our interactions. Um, but there was still nothing in place when it came to pat searches and strip searches at the time of me leaving in October of last year. Um, they were, I know that during the summertime, they were attempting to put in place a procedure where you could volunteer, male staff could volunteer to be put on a list. So if an actual biological female who identified as a male wanted to be pat searched by a male officer, that they could request that and they would go to the volunteer list. And the same thing went for the biological men who they had brought to the facility. If they wanted to request a female officer to pat search them or strip search them, that they could go to that volunteer list and choose from officers who were available on the list to perform those tasks. But that was rescinded. I'm not really sure the reason why, but they stopped. They put that into practice for about a week, and then they stopped. There was some sort of issue with it. I imagine it was a legal issue, and so they stopped that practice. So as of the time I left in um, October, they didn't have a procedure in place. They were just kind of flying by the seat of their pants at that point. They were still having our female staff um, doing all strips and pat searches, even of the biological males.
That's what I was going to ask, if the female guards were, that's another thing. That was not in their job description when they took that
Right.
job. So were the female guards made to pat search these men?
They weren't required to. Um, they could opt out. Let's
Okay.
say if they were asked to do a strip search of a biological male, they could say, "I'm not comfortable with that," and they would management would or supervisors would just go to somebody who was willing to do it. It was very much frowned upon, of course, because they expected us to just go with the flow, and if one of these biological men needed to be strip searched or pat searched, that the female officers would just be up to the task. But many of them were very uncomfortable with it and um, opted out. But it was always frowned upon when they would opt out, and you know that type of thing can definitely affect your ability to progress as far as moving up in the um, promotions, stuff like that.
Sure.
Um, ultimately, but yeah, it was always frowned upon if you did opt out. It was expected of you to just step up and
Hmm.
perform that task.
And
Wow.
can I ask, of the males, I guess there were six when you were there? The six
Uh,
males?
no, there were more than that.
More than that.
Um,
Okay, how
yeah,
many? Do you know
um,
how many?
it was probably closer to a dozen.
Oh,
Yeah, and we had a couple that had released. There were biological males that had released during the time I was there. That came in and then left. Um, and they were all in different stages of uh, you know what's the
transition.
transitioning, there you go.
But most of
um,
them had their male genitalia still, right?
correct, correct, and many, well, I wouldn't say many, but I know a handful of them, through um, them talking, they like to talk a lot from not a lot to do in there. So many of them weren't even taking hormones.
They were not
Yeah.
required to do anything, right? Except say
As
they
far as
were.
I know, yeah, as far as I know, they were not required to be on hormone therapy, or at any point in a transition. They just had to proclaim that they identified as female, and I believe there was a process where they you had to convince a therapist, and then that was it.
And there
Wow.
was no a length of time they had to say that, like,
Not as far as I know. I had not heard of any specific amount of time. Um, I think they had to see that the therapist for a couple months, but I don't believe there was. It was probably a case by case basis because this is all new. This is all. There weren't procedures put in place yet. It was all kind of, like I said before, a little bit of flying by the seat of your pants and trying to figure stuff out as it comes along.
So, a lot of the letters that many of the women have sent to me from inside, a lot of the complaints are the trans are very privileged
mhm.
uh, by the guards
Yes.
because of being in fear.
I would definitely say that they didn't receive privilege from the officers. Um, that came from the top, and they definitely did have privileges, and many of them had direct phone numbers to staff at headquarters. So if they had a complaint about an officer, they believed that they were being mistreated or singled out, that they could call headquarters straight away and reach somebody up there to make complaints, going over the heads of our chain of command. So in that case, they definitely had privileges. I know of a couple of them that bragged about having direct numbers to headquarters, and were given those numbers by those people at headquarters. And headquarters, people from headquarters would often come down and have meetings with the transgenders and make sure that they weren't being targeted, and that as far as they were concerned, that they were being treated fairly, and whatever else took place in the meetings, I wasn't really privy to that. It's just what I had been told by some of the transgenders, and let me make this very clear: is that I had really good rapport with many of the transgenders, and like the female to male transgenders, I absolutely had no problem with them being there. I mean, they belong there; they're biological female,
Mhm.
and I had really good rapport with all of them as far as I know, and even a handful of the biological men who were there. I still had good rapport with them. I always treated them with kindness, and I don't have anything against them personally. I really don't. the problem is they just do not belong in the women's facility, and it puts the women, biological women, at risk of sexual assault,
Mhm.
of just plain old regular assault. The transgenders were given privileges that the biological women were not given,
Mm.
and
Like what?
Mm.
um,
Phone number.
well, they were treated better,
Mhm.
and it was often that the management would come around and pick them out of the crowd and ask them how they were doing, and ask them, is anybody treating you poorly? Is there anybody who's, you have a problem with? They were always, it seemed like, always had, they could demand, if they were like, somebody was performing a pat search or a cell search on them, which is normal, common, everyday, random things that happen in the institution. Boy, they could demand that they talk to a lieutenant, and the lieutenant would come down and talk to them. Um, it always seemed like there was, um, they did have special privileges.
Mhm.
Mm.
Um,
What about
any
as
other
far
any
as
other
their medical went? That was another thing that a lot of the women were complaining about, was that their medical is not being taken serious and that they're putting these men before the women.
well, I didn't spend a lot of time in the clinic uh, during the daytime hours. So I'm not really sure as far as if they were given special medical treatment. This is what I do know, and this isn't just the biological males, but also the biological females who are transitioning did receive um, special. I don't know if they were privileges, but approvals for surgeries that were purely cosmetic.
Right.
We had some of the biological women who were transitioning to men, and the state paid for their breast removals,
Yes.
a
And
couple
yet,
of them.
yeah. And yet you have women in there that have cancer and are going to die if they don't get help and they're not being looked after.
Yeah, yeah, you can say that, and definitely, especially during the whole COVID thing, they were definitely put on the back burner. But we had a biological male, and who I actually really liked. I got along with him well. Um, but he was approved for top and bottom surgery. That means he was
Mhm.
approved for breast implants, and the
Mhm.
state was going to pay for that. It hadn't happened since I had been there, because I know he had some other medical issues that they needed to take care of before they did the cosmetic stuff. But you're giving a man, just forget that it's a man, you're giving an innate breast implants. And
Mm.
how do you not give that to the woman, the female inmate who had a mastectomy?
They
Because
don't do that? They don't give them to the women who've had
I've never heard of it. I had never
no.
heard of it. And as a matter of fact, I know of one of the a woman who had an inmate who had her breast removed and was talking to me about um, getting tattoos in that area. Um, but
Hmm.
again, if you're a male and you're transitioning to female, the state's paying for your bottom surgery and your breast implants. That's just all purely cosmetic.
No.
And I don't understand how they can justify spending taxpayer money on cosmetic surgeries. I
Yeah.
just don't understand it.
Yeah, it's crazy. Would like to um, ask you about, were you there when uh, the princess Zoe Love, I don't know, he has like four or
Mhm.
five, six different names. When he came in and they knew that he had already raped a 12-year-old, when he came in, was he put into a cell with one of the women or was he segregated?
Initially, they did have him in the mental health unit, and just for a week or so, and then they moved him into a close custody unit where he had a female, biological female cellmate. And in the close custody units, they lock them down at night. So there's no leaving that cell for, I believe it's 12-hour lockdown. So there's no leaving that cell throughout the night. And he was put in there. Actually, it was initially, I do recall now, he was put in there with a biological female who, um, in the middle of the night, uh, he had gotten up to use the toilet, and when he did, he was standing when he was urinating. He didn't even pretend at that point. I think she believed he was, you know, trying to get her attention, letting her know that, hey, I've got some working genitalia here. So he stood while he was peeing that night, and she saw that and she flipped out. And she
Mm,
really was very angry about it. She had no idea that he had working genitalia,
mm.
and they did uh, move her out of the cell that night, or sorry, the next day, and then they put in another female who unfortunately was sexually assaulted by him.
Right.
Right.
And that what we read that you said to the National Review is that she was very childlike, right? She had sort of a mental
Um,
disability or
yeah,
something.
she she had the you know, the, I would say, the mentality of a small child.
Wow.
She was very, very innocent. She had spent a lot of time in the mental health unit as well. Um, she was very, very much um, had like a victim uh, type demeanor. So she was. It was really a bad idea to put them in a cell together.
Did anybody raise objections or question that? Because
I
right.
don't believe that anybody knew it was happening. Those decisions
uh,
are
yeah.
made, with the unit supervisors. So I don't believe anybody even realized what was happening. And
Mm.
with him being a predator and her being just unable to defend herself, and as a matter of
Even
fact,
even if
he had a,
she
hmm,
Mhm.
All right, go ahead, Scott.
oh, even once the they were discovered to be in bed together, he ended up convincing that woman to say that it was consensual. So, and she didn't really know any better.
And
Right.
after that, was he moved out of that cell or was he just left with her?
Um, I believe they moved her out of the cell, and when they did, he threw a big fit and then ended up going to segregation for a few days, and then they brought him back and put him back in that cell. So they moved her from the cell, and allowed him to stay in the cell ultimately. And
So
I even think they may have moved her to another unit. Yeah, I do believe they moved her to a medium security unit.
why is it that when these men that are claiming to be women are in the men's prison, the facility keeps them segregated away from the the men, but yet when they take these men and they put them in a woman's facility, they house them in the same cell with women. And especially if they know this man is a rapist, a child molester, they put him in a cell with a woman?
Yeah, and not only that, he did have a history of committing sexual assaults at the men's prison. He had um, been found guilty uh, through the infraction system of sexual assault at the men's prison. So he was a predator. Um,
And they
but
lock him up there so that he can't hurt anybody in the men's prison, but when they put him in the women's prison, they put him in a woman's cell.
well, according to him, when he was at the men's prison, though he did display predatory behavior and was found guilty of such, uh, he claimed that was he was concerned about being taken advantage of or sexually assaulted. So that's why he requested to be put into protective custody. Knowing him, likely it was just part of the ploy to
Mhm.
get put into the women's prison.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
didn't it also said in the article that as soon as he got out, he re-identified as a male. Is that
I was told that by multiple inmates who
Mhm.
said that they had stayed in contact with him.
Okay?
Um, in particular, his a former cellmate of his said that as soon as he got out, he had cut his hair, um, and even the inmates that were friends of his always referred to him as he.
Oh,
Um,
really?
Mm. So after he raped this mentally ill young woman, was and what was the punishment? What?
there was no punishment. Um, so what had happened is, like I said, he had convinced this um, woman to say that it was consensual.
Right.
So initially, the officer that discovered them in bed together did write an infraction. Um, the infraction was turned in, and a hearing took place. And during the hearing, he said that it was consensual, and then they asked her, who he had convinced to say it was consensual. And so the infraction was dismissed, and there was nothing put in the computer, nothing as far as behavioral observations go. And because it was an infraction that was found not guilty, it just every part of it just disappeared, like it never
Didn't-
happened.
But didn't you say that at the time of the assault, the PREA Act was still in force, saying any sexual
That's
contact was not allowed?
yeah, that's correct. There, according to PREA, and just according to the rules of the Department of Corrections, two inmates cannot consent to having sexual relations together. They're wards of the state, so they're unable to consent. It's just like they tell us if a staff member and an inmate were to have an intimate relationship, that it would be rape from the staff member would be
Mhm.
raping, legally, they'd be raping the incarcerated individual because that incarcerated individual cannot consent because
Mhm.
they're wards of the state. So the same goes for inmate to inmate, is that they cannot legally consent.
Right.
And so it it the PREA law, we were notified just a couple months after that happened that the PREA rules had changed and that now inmates can actually consent only with one another. And I do believe, and I could be wrong, but this is my belief, based on the timing and based on what had happened at our institution, and based on it getting some um, media attention,
Yep.
that PREA rule was
Mhm.
changed as a result of what had happened in that
Yeah,
cell that night.
I think you're right.
But even so, it sounds like when he said that she consented and she agreed that she had consented, even if maybe she hadn't, already weren't counting that as anything. Even before the rule changed, it sounds like they decided that didn't mean it was rape, even though,
Yeah,
they weren't
that
following the law, basically.
Yeah.
correct. Yeah,
Yeah.
that was a decision that was made by whoever had conducted that um, infraction hearing. So I don't know why they didn't follow that rule, but it should have been. Um, in fact, following the rule, they both should have been in trouble.
Mhm.
Because it was a sexual act between two of them, and at that point, they would have both had hearings, and they could have said, it was consensual or non-consensual. Wouldn't matter. It was sexual contact between two offenders. They both would have actually been found guilty. um, and honestly, if they would have both been found guilty and faced some sort of um, negative repercussion for their acts, it might have given her a reason to fess up and say, "Hey, this wasn't actually
Right.
consensual."
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Good point. Really good point. So there was no rape kit, there was no pregnancy test, there nothing?
No, no. Like I said, it was. as if it never happened. As soon as
Wow.
the infraction was found, as soon as he was found not guilty, the whole incident just disappeared. Um,
Mm.
as a matter of fact, I do believe that, and I can't truly speak for this officer, but I do believe that um, the officer who found them in bed together had received um, some directives from the state, or I believe it was coming from headquarters. It may have been coming from management, but I do believe it came from headquarters, that she was um, not to forward any information when it came to public disclosure requests
Wow.
with any uh, that particular incident. And I do believe there was something that came down for all staff when it came to transgenders, that we couldn't share any information that had to do with them through public disclosure requests, which is really, really strange.
Well, and that's even before this bill 1956 that was just recently passed, saying this was protected, this information, but this is even before that.
Yeah,
That's how they were operating. Okay.
yeah. There was there was an advocacy group that had started that. They I don't remember the name of the advocacy group, but I know that they had attorneys and were trying to stop any of that information coming out, because, like I said, there was some media attention. Staff had There was a staff member that had come forward and in regards to this incident, and so I think that there were media sources trying to do public disclosure requests to get more information about the
Yeah.
incident. And that's when that email had come out saying, do not respond to public disclosure requests when it comes to the transgenders.
Mm.
Hmm. Okay. Do you happen to know if Nathan Gonanin is still in WCCW?
I'm not sure. He was when I had left in October.
Okay.
And
And
you said that this is the man that was put in a cell with his girlfriend and just carrying on.
Yeah,
What?
yeah, he was. Um, they were allowed boyfriend and girlfriend to live in the cell together. Um, I don't think there was any secret about what was going on in that cell every night. They were very sexually active.
so what about contraceptives? I mean, how does she keep from getting pregnant?
I'm not sure. I never had that conversation with her or him. I didn't really know him very well. Um, but they don't pass out contraceptives at the institution, as far as I know. There might be birth control available. I know that there are other reasons besides for as a contraceptive why birth control might be needed, as
Right.
far um, what is it,
Women's
orthotricycline, or
cycles.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
yeah. So there might be reasons for hormonal um, balancing and stuff like that, that it might be needed, to make, periods not as extreme, stuff like
Right.
that. So maybe that was available for those reasons, and they may have passed it out. I don't really know. Like I said, I didn't spend a lot of time in the clinic. I don't know much about anybody's medical history or anything. We don't have. I never had any access to medical files or anything like that, and I'm very familiar with HIPAA law, and I wouldn't share it even if I did
Sure.
have access
Didn't
to it.
you say, in the article, I don't know if it was you who was quoted, there were some other sources, but that Andromeda Love was saying he was going to make $1 million baby. Like
Yeah,
he
yeah,
was going to get
that was
someone
actually
pregnant.
a thing between he and I and his cellmate at the time. It was almost like little inside joke. I had good rapport with Andromeda Love. I
Yeah.
never had any problems with him. So I was teasing him one day about you get getting pregnant, and I said, what are you guys trying to do? You gonna get pregnant on purpose so you can sue the state and have yourself $1 million baby, or and you know he said more like $1 billion baby. And so basically every day that he'd be walking by me on the breezeway, he would do this little hand gesture like he was making it rain with cash, and
Mm.
would kind of have a little chuckle about it. But yeah, they joked about having themselves $1 billion baby.
Wow.
And did any of these men try to act like females? I mean, did they make any
Yeah,
attempt?
yeah. There
They-
were a couple that you could definitely tell actually suffered from gender dysphoria,
yeah.
and presented as women, and did a very did their best to be feminine and act like a woman would.
Mhm.
And I had a lot more respect for those ones, because they were suffering. And granted, I still did not believe they belonged there, but at least that they were real and they were
They were
being
genuine.
themselves.
Yeah.
Yes, genuine. And then we have others who were there because they were taking advantage of a loophole in the system, a weakness in the system, and the state was allowing them to be there.
Right, right. And you said that there are 150 waiting to get in, and we know that there's like over 300 waiting to get into California, and those numbers don't line up with the statistics of gender dysphoria. So I mean, that's really obvious to me that all of these men do not are, they do not have gender dysphoria. They're using this as an excuse to get into
Yeah,
the women's
I,
prison.
I don't know that the number 150 is the number.
Mhm.
I was told by one of my superiors there that it was well over 100 were attempting to come to the women's prison, men, and even a couple of them were notorious. We knew them because I worked at a male institution for 5 years prior to coming to a women's institution. So um, we knew some of these men from years back, and they are very much men. And once a precedent was set that men can pretend to be women and get into the women's prison, it was like that door opened, and there was a flood of men trying to get over to the women's prison.
Mhm.
And who can really blame them? It's the time is going to be easier, less.
Right.
I mean, there's women there. Like,
It's
wow,
yeah, exactly. Every
um,
student I have that I talk to about this, uh, that's what they say. They say, "Oh yeah, if I ever got prison, all I have to do is just say that I feel like a woman, then I could go over and be with the women." And
yeah. I mean, and that's the thing is that who can blame them? You know, I don't blame those individuals. I blame the state of Washington.
yeah,
I blame the person who has made the decision
hmm
to say, yeah, it's okay for biological men to be in that women's prison. These
right,
men are just taking advantage of the system that's been created by the superiors in the state of Washington.
right.
And Scott, who would that be, the director of corrections, like the head person
I
that made this decision?
No, no, no.
I
That the
I
decision's being made by the state. That's being
I,
made.
Well,
I don't believe
it's,
that it. I don't
there's no
believe that it.
law. There's no law right now.
I believe
It
it's
hasn't
coming
been
down from
passed.
higher. I believe it's coming from higher than director of Department of Corrections.
So you think from Washington DC, like
No, I think that it might. I can't say for sure. It's
Governor
all
Inslee?
speculation, but
Mm,
yeah, it's most likely Inslee or one of his
Mm,
advisors, somebody up high.
yeah,
It's not coming from department.
right.
I don't believe it's coming from the department. I think they are putting people in place now that are pro and support of this. We had Sinclair recently retire, who was the head of Department of Corrections, and I can't speak for him at all, but in fact I won't. But they are putting new management in place high up in the department. I assume it's because they are in support of these changes. Um, but I do believe it's coming from higher than the department. I definitely know for a positive, for a fact, that it's higher up than the institution.
Mhm.
I know for a fact that our many of the management, um, well, they're in support of women, biological women. We'll say that.
So they disagreed, the management disagreed with this policy, but just were forced to
I,
adopt it.
yeah, I can't really speak for them. I really can't, and I have a lot of respect for them,
Mhm,
so I won't.
Yeah.
mhm.
But let's just say that some of the management was very excited to see you guys protesting that day.
Oh,
Yeah. Yeah.
okay.
Well, what about Douglas Perry, Donna Perry? I mean, this is a man who has killed multiple women. He's a serial killer. He was on the America's Most Wanted, and they even put somebody like that in there. That's just mind-boggling.
Yeah, I agree that somebody whose victims were all women, who had
Mhm.
obviously had a history of not only violence against women, but murdering
Right.
women.
Yeah.
Uh, it doesn't make sense. It really doesn't. And I do know there are a lot of people who have said this. A lot of the women who are incarcerated, a lot of the staff ask this question: why can't the transgender um, folks, the ones who identify as transgender, put in their own facility, or
Right,
even just their own unit? You know,
Right.
right.
if
Yeah.
you're going to put them in the women's institution, why can't they be put into their own housing unit where they
Mhm.
Mhm.
don't have access to biological females?
Right.
Yes.
And the answer is, and has been, that they consider that discrimination against them. In order to put them somewhere that is other than general population is considered discrimination,
And that's
and that
considered a bigger problem than the attacks on the women. Is that
Right.
right?
yeah, yeah. Well, I don't agree. I don't believe so.
No,
I
but I
think
mean, someone high up considers that
yeah,
Right.
is,
yeah, and which is just mind-boggling to me because we have at one time we had 800 women there, and you have what 6 to 10 biological males at that time, and their rights are more important than the biological women. That the vast majority, uh, many
Scott,
hundreds
that's
of
what
times.
exactly. That's what I said in my testimonial, my testimony that I wrote up when we, fought the 1956 bill was, how can you take this very, very small group of people and and totally cater to them while you annihilate all of the other people inside the prison's rights. I mean, that doesn't
yeah.
make any sense at all.
Yeah, I
Mm,
I definitely agree. And you know, doing that, doing moving the biological men to the women's institution, really undermined my authority or undermined my ability to do my job. And my
mm,
job ultimately is to keep the women in that institution safe.
mhm.
And when you move biological men into a woman's space and you put them in cells with biological women, I can't do anything. I cannot keep that woman safe without standing outside of that cell 24 hours a day. I really am. It is impossible to keep her safe, and that is ultimately what I was hired to do.
Well,
And it's very unfortunate that I had to be, um, you know, not working there anymore
Mm,
in order to actually do something in order to try and help keep those women safe. Because
right.
when I was there, um, we couldn't speak out.
Mhm.
There was very much um, a it was well known that if you spoke out against something that had to do with the transgenders, that you could possibly face disciplinary action. Um, you know, they're very much a protected class
yeah.
for sure. for sure. And that was another thing that really bothered me, is because we're supposed to be protecting our women,
Right.
not only inside the institutions but outside the institutions. you know Women fought so hard, and supporting men also, for women's rights, for equality. And now we have men who claim to be women, who all of a sudden just move right to the top of the oppression scale,
Hmm.
and
Yeah.
now their rights matter more than biological women.
Right.
Tell us about it. We know.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh
Yeah,
man.
yeah. I
Preaching
mean,
to the choir.
it's very unfortunate. I've had this conversation with April a couple times, and that's that I it it almost feels like women are being erased when when you allow men to compete at a college level,
Mhm.
and they're winning championships and breaking world records. And why would a woman even bother competing? you
Mhm.
know and these women who were in the record books, who held world records, are now just being erased
Yeah.
because a man decides that he wants to compete in a woman's sport. um,
Yeah,
it's
it's
just
really
ridiculous.
unjust. It is. And
Lovely.
yeah, and when you were talking about, we've lost our sex-based rights. And when you were talking about, working and being in the prison and, feeling like, you weren't even able to, your job is to keep those women safe, and you were saying that you didn't feel like you could do that. And that's really intense, because I'm sure that every other guard felt the same way, which really tells us that those women have no protection.
Mhm.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. When that cell door closes for the night,
Mhm.
the staff in that unit is only required to do a tear check once an hour
Mm.
throughout the night. So
Can the
you know
women call out for help? Is
uh,
there,
they can push a button, as long
okay,
as they can get to that button.
yeah.
Yeah,
And
and that might not be the case.
I mean, was there any discussion among the whoever had power to make decisions, to ask the women, those who really would be traumatized, to not force them to be housed with the men? But some women don't mind, like some, right? Correct? Some women
Yeah, I
felt
mean,
differently.
the
Did they
girlfriends,
ever try
obviously.
to weed out the ones who really didn't want to be with them and not force it?
I was never in any meetings where they were making any sort of decisions like that. But
Mhm.
just in speaking to the women who are incarcerated, they weren't being heard. I don't
Mhm.
believe
Oh,
that management really cared what they thought. This is a time where it's more important to not be seen as a bigot, and not be seen as, nobody wants to be labeled a racist or a bigot, or we're in
transphobe.
a transphobic. There you go. And we live in such a woke society right now that anyone who speaks out against something like this, whether they believe that, like I said, a lot of these transgender people I really like. I got along with
Sure.
them well, but they don't belong in a women's institution. You're a biological male. You do not belong there. That's as simple as that. It doesn't mean I don't like you. It just means
Right.
that you pose a threat,
Yes,
regardless. Yeah.
exactly. It's not safe.
Were
And
any, would you say that of all the transgender males there, that they were all attracted to women? None of them were gay males,
um,
as far as you?
no, I wouldn't say that. I think the ones that were pretending were obviously attracted to women, and that was the main motivation for them being there. But the
Mm.
ones that actually, and I'm thinking one in particular who obviously suffered from gender dysphoria and had the top and bottom surgery approved, definitely attracted to men.
Okay.
Um, yeah, no doubt about that. But he was one of the, I won't say legitimate, but somebody who obviously had plans to transition.
But
Whereas
like, yeah,
the ones that are faking it are there to be close to women, and they have no intention of transitioning.
Yeah.
but maybe that one man would have been at risk at the male prison. more than the others, would you
Yeah,
say?
yeah, it's possible. It's
Yeah.
possible. Yeah, because he definitely had effeminate traits,
Mm.
and yeah,
But most
definitely
of
a
them didn't fall
possibility.
into that category. Most of them
No,
didn't
I
seem
don't.
effeminate at all. Okay.
I don't believe so. And also at the men's institution, if you are, and I can say this from experience because I worked in a men's institution, if you're in fear of assault or sexual assault at any point in time, you can request to be put into protective custody, and
Okay.
they will move you into segregation,
Mhm.
and that's a maximum security housing unit where nobody can get to you, and you'll be perfectly safe.
Mhm.
So if these people were truly in fear of being assaulted, they could request to be put into protective custody.
Okay. That's good to know.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Scott, thank you very much. It's been real eye-opening, and we will be holding a protest April 10th, putting it out there and trying to educate the public and let them know. It's just incredible how many people still don't even know that this is going on.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And it's a pleasure being here, and I look forward to the protests on the
Great.
10th.
Thank you.
Um, and where is it going to be located?
Oh, we'll talk about that later. I'll
Okay.
I'll get I'll get with you, and I'll get the information to you.
All right. Sounds good.
Yeah.
Thank you, Scott.
Thank you
Thank you
very
so
much.
much
Thank
for your
you.
support and what you're doing.
Thank
Yes,
you.
thank you so
We
much. I
appreciate
really
it.
appreciate you.
Yeah.
All right. Have a good night.